question coming in, Mr. Vice President, from Taylor Bebo. He asks, do you agree with the D.C. versus Heller decision in regards to protecting the individual right to bear arms that are in common use? We have a social media question coming in, Mr. Vice President, from Taylor Bebo. He asks, do you agree with the D.C. versus Heller decision in regards to protecting the individual right to bear arms that are in common use and which are utilized for lawful purposes?
The answer is, I think you can. If I were in the court, I wouldn't have made the same ruling. Okay, that's number one. But let me explain where I am on the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment, for example, the First Amendment, freedom of speech. If any one of you stood up and yelled fire, you could be arrested. You have a freedom of speech to say fire, but not in a crowded forum where people would try to get out and maybe someone get hurt tripping over one another. Every constitutional amendment has a limitation. And I taught for years constitutional law and separation of powers. I taught the Second Amendment. And the Second Amendment is not absolute. And we can argue, and the fundamental argument is well-regulated militia and all those things. I won't get into that. I think that the fundamental argument is the reason it was given as a right is because we needed to be able to muster people to deal with an enemy called Great Britain we were fighting in a war. But hey, that's a different matter. But here's the deal. We've never argued that you can own any weapon you want. It's never been the case that anyone can own any weapon they want. If you are mentally deranged, if you are psychopathic, if you are someone who is 12 years old, if you are someone who has a criminal record, if you are a wife beater, it's always been, we can deny you the right to own a weapon. Period. Any kind of weapon. A hunting weapon, any kind of weapon. Because you are not a stable citizen in the minds of the American people. Secondly, we've always been able to say what kind of weapon you can have. Now, I know some of you in New Hampshire, like Delaware, the tree of liberty is watered with the blood of patriots. I get that. But guess what? If that's about being able to protect yourself against the government, you need an F-15. I mean, a jet. You know, you need a bazooka. No, I'm being try to be rational about this. You need a weapon that's compatible with the government is going to abuse you if that's what you think the purpose is. Does anybody think anybody has a right to own a bazooka, a flamethrower, a machine gun? I'm not joking. So why in God's name do you say there's an absolute right to own a weapon that is semi-automatic, that is a military-style weapon designed for one reason, to shoot and kill people in war, that can hold up to 50, 70, 100 rounds of ammunition? As I said back home when I was getting beat up for supporting this, I said when I'd go through the streams where everybody fishes down my way, the sportsmen's clubs I'd go to, and I'd say, look, if you need 100 rounds, you shouldn't be hunting. You're really dangerous to yourself. No, I'm serious. Not a joke. Look, this is about talking common sense. And so I think that's why I led the fight to pass the Brady Bill. The Brady Bill are the background checks. He was the former secretary, the former press person for my colleague Bill Roth, and then went on to Ronald Reagan. Remember he got shot? Well, you know, it's rational to say certain people shouldn't be able to own a weapon, period. Secondly, it's rational to say there's certain kinds of weapons you can't own. They have no social redeeming value, have nothing to do with sportsmanship or your right to own a gun. And by the way, I have, with my son who died, excuse me. Anyway, my son Bo, he was a decorated veteran, a Conspicuous Service Medal, a Bronze Star, etc. A year in Iraq and spent time in. Anyway, he had 3 shotguns, and I have 2. I have a 20 gauge and a 12 gauge. I'm not a hunter. I'm a skeet shooter. My dad used to be a hunter, but I'm a skeet shooter. And I haven't done that, in all fairness, for 9, 10 years. Not because of anything other than I just have lost interest. But imagine, I have 5 grandchildren. Well, guess what? Those guns are locked up. Locked. Why is it that if you left the key in the car outside here today, and a kid goes in and starts that car, 14 years old, gets in an accident, accidentally kills somebody, you are safe? Why in God's name should you not be required to have trigger locks on your weapon? Why? Sandy Hook wouldn't have happened had that mother had those weapons, which she apparently was entitled to own. She passed the test, and the kid comes along, and he picks them up. Why shouldn't he be required to have a trigger lock? So this is an irrational argument. And the biggest problem is not the NRA. The majority of NRA members agree with us now, or with me now. Well, guess what? It's the gun manufacturers. They want to sell more weapons. You know, we have a technology. Last thing I'll say. We have a technology now. You can make sure you cannot, James Bond like, you can't pull a trigger of a gun you have unless your biomarker is on it. That's developed. It exists. Well, guess what? I met with the folks out in Silicon Valley who developed these, and they started to sell them in several gun stores, chains. Manufacturers came along and they said, if you don't take them off the rack, we're going to boycott you. So they took it off the rack. How do I violate your Second Amendment right, whatever weapon it is you're entitled to have, if you're the only one that can pull the trigger? How does that violate your right at all? So this isn't about that. It's about selling more guns. It's about profit. And I think it's dead wrong. We have an epidemic.